Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. U.S. Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris selects Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate in the battle for the White House. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns that Israel will exact a heavy price if attacked by Iran or its proxies in the region. And in our health report, the World Health Organization weighs whether the latest outbreak of Mpox should be declared a global public health emergency. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. The peak is in. U.S. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris on Tuesday selected Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate. In choosing Walz, Harris picked a progressive policy champion and a plain speaker from America's upper Midwest. Walz, a 60-year-old U.S. Army National Guard veteran and former teacher, was elected to a Republican-leaning district in the House of Representatives in 2006 and served 12 years before being elected governor of Minnesota in 2018. As governor, Walz has pushed a progressive agenda that includes free school meals, goals for tackling climate change, tax cuts for the middle class, and expanded paid leave for Minnesota workers. Harris now adds a popular Midwestern politician whose home state votes reliably for Democrats in presidential elections, but is close to Wisconsin and Michigan, two crucial battleground states. Vice President Kamala Harris' coronation as the Democrats' standard-bearer for the 2024 presidential election is now official after the Democratic National Committee announced the formal results of the online voting by delegates Monday night. It caps a tumultuous period for the party prompted by President Joe Biden's debate performance and subsequent withdrawal from the race. Harris rose through the California political and law enforcement ranks to become the first female vice president in U.S. history. She clinches the nomination more than 4 years after her first attempt at the presidency collapsed. Now, for more on the selection of Tim Walz as Kamala Harris' pick for a running mate, I'm joined live from here in Washington by Nola Haynes, national security and foreign policy expert at Georgetown University. Nola, let's begin with who is Tim Walz and what does he bring to the table for Democrats?
I'm so excited. As the daughter of veterans, I can't tell you how I'm excited for Governor Walz to join the ticket. Definitely, he strengthens and bolsters the type of patriotism and the type of national security platform that the vice president also stands very firmly on. So he is definitely a complement to the ticket. He is a defender of democracy. We see that in his record. And he's just a good guy. He's an all-around good guy. You mentioned earlier that he's a plain talker. And I think that is a great balance to vice president. He can relate to people around the country. And he is a strong communicator. So he's a great value add to the ticket.
But why are those accomplishments important for this election?
Well, to be very honest, there's been a lot of talk about Vice President Harris's foreign policy and national security record. So as a foreign policy, national security person, I want to highlight some of the things that he's done successfully in the state of Minnesota. And then having the experience of being a congressman, sitting on the Committee for Veterans Affairs, that's a nice compliment to making sure that our veterans are provided for in our country. And he's done amazing things in Minnesota for veterans. He ended veterans homelessness in 13 counties in Minnesota. That is incredible. That is so vital for our national security and also to make sure that we are taking care of the folks that go out around the world and keep us safe. So a few things that I want to highlight. He's a friend to Ukraine. That is very important. Early on, he signed on a bipartisan support for Ukraine. He also stopped direct investment in Russia and Belarus right when Russia invaded Ukraine. And like I said, he ended veterans homelessness, which is really important to me. And one other thing that is also important, he is not afraid to stand up to China. He's tough on China. He's tough on their human rights record.
Nola, if Kamala Harris wins this election, she will be the first female president in the United States. But what would this mean for the women and girls in America and the world at large?
It means everything. And because she does, possess Jamaican Black identity, and because she's also a South Asian woman, what she stands for around the world, and she represents so many of us. I couldn't imagine growing up being a little brown girl looking at this beautiful woman as the president of the United States, the most powerful person in the world. So not only is she a beacon of hope in terms of representation, but she's also strong and powerful. She's ready on day one. She's battle tested, and she will be formidable on the international stage, and she will absolutely stand up to our competitors, our foes, and she will make sure that democracy is first and foremost as she represents us around the world in terms of norms and values. And I do believe Tim Walz would be a great complement to that too.
Nola, they say one day in politics can be a long, long time. Things can change, but you know what? We'll watch and see. We got 2 months and some change to get there, Nola.
I'll be happy. I'll stay happy how I feel right now. I like this feeling.
Right. Nola Haynes is a national security and foreign policy expert at Georgetown University here in Washington. Republican J.D. Vance is Donald Trump's presidential running mate. He joins the Republican ticket as one of the youngest vice presidential candidates since Richard Nixon in 1952. The nomination puts his newcomer status and political inexperience to the test. VOA's Tina Trinh reports.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to announce that Senator J.D. Vance has the overwhelming support of this convention to be the next Vice President of the United States.
It's an end to months of speculation. Presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump selected 39-year-old Ohio freshman Senator J.D. Vance as his vice presidential running mate on the first day of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. In a posting on Truth Social, Trump stated Vance is the person best suited to assume the vice presidency. Vance's political identity centers on his ties to the Rust Belt region of the U.S., and his populist sentiments align with Trump's appeal to the white working class.
Of the options that former President Trump had available to him, Senator Vance was the one who is probably the most closely associated with President Trump's MAGA style and philosophy.
Vice presidential historian Joel Goldstein says the selection is unusual in that most VP picks are an attempt to reach voters outside of their existing base instead of those already in it.
And so I think that what President Trump is hoping is that he will help energize some voters to vote who might not otherwise vote. That he will appeal to people who have a similar background as Senator Vance comes from.
Vance came to prominence in 2016 with his memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, which detailed the poverty of his upbringing and the industrial and economic decline of his hometown of Middletown, Ohio. Vance's parents divorced early in his childhood, and he was raised largely by his grandparents as his mother grappled with drug addiction. Enlisting in the Marine Corps after high school, Vance went on to graduate from the Ohio State University and Yale Law School. He worked as a venture capitalist in San Francisco for Silicon Valley entrepreneur Peter Thiel, who also donated $10 million to a super PAC or political action committee supporting Vance's run for Senate. A former critic of Trump, Vance once described the former president as reprehensible and called him America's Hitler. He has since become a staunch Trump supporter and advocate, but remains the least experienced of Trump's VP contenders.
I think that the attention that will be paid to the issue of presidential succession, both because of the age of the competing presidential candidates and because of the recent assassination attempt on President Trump's life, will raise questions in some voters' minds regarding Senator Vance's readiness to be president on day one, given that Senator Vance has such relative
in the region after a pair of high-profile assassinations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns the country will exact a quote, heavy price if attacked by Iran or its proxies. VOA's Anita Powell has more from the White House.
Tensions are running high throughout the Levant, with Israel facing threats from Iran and along its northern border, as its forces try to quash Hamas in Gaza after nearly 10 months of conflict. And in Washington, President Joe Biden is attempting to cool things down after last week's assassinations of two top anti-Israel figures.
The White House said over the weekend that it is committed to a hostage release and ceasefire deal that has so far been elusive, but emphasized that Washington stands ready to respond and has surged military resources to the region. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby spoke on Fox News Sunday.
We still believe a ceasefire deal is the best way to bring this war to an end. It's also, we believe, very possible. We still believe the gaps are narrow enough to close. The other thing that we've been doing since the 7th of October is making sure that not only Israel has what it needs to defend itself, but that this war doesn't escalate to become something broader.
Analysts say this is a tense moment.
I think one of the reasons that this is all so scary, to be honest, for everybody, is that it isn't clear what the United States can do when we're on the brink like this.
Advocates for the American Muslim community, which has criticized Biden's strong support for Israel, say Washington should take a firm line on Israel's aggression in Gaza.
The United States possesses a wide array of diplomatic and political tools to hold Israel accountable, whether that's withholding aid, ammunition, weapons, political support, or sanctioning more of Israel's far-right settlers that have been engaged in violence.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel was determined to stand against Iran and its proxies on every front.
Anyone who murders our citizens, anyone who harms our country will be held accountable. He will pay a very heavy price.
Jordan's foreign minister recently paid a rare visit to Iran's capital, Tehran, and Biden on Monday spoke to Jordan's King Abdullah II about de-escalating tensions in the region. Hall says U.S. diplomacy with Iran through a regional mediator such as Qatar or Jordan may be the best way forward.
To speak to Iran, try to address their concerns, but also to be essentially a conduit for the United States to ensure that there's some kind of open channel during these particularly scary times. And I think that is more necessary than ever before, since the United States does not directly speak to high-ranking Iranian officials.
So with nearly 40,000 people dead, Gaza in ruins, and Lebanon and Iran on high alert, the world is waiting to see what happens next. A reporter asked Biden about one of the key players in the conflict as he left church on Sunday.
Do you think Iran will stand down, sir?
I hope so. We don't know.
Anita Powell, VOA News, the White House.
As Israel braces for possible attacks by Iran and Hezbollah, families of Israeli hostages still held in Gaza marked 300 days last week since the war, with marches and gatherings with warnings that time is running out. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the death toll approaches 40,000 and health officials there warn of a growing health crisis as hepatitis cases surpass 100,000. Linda Gradstein reports from Jerusalem.
Thousands of people marched through the streets of Jerusalem wearing labels with the number 300 on them. The march was organized by Rachel and John Goldberg Poland, whose 23-year-old son Hirsch was among those kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival October 7th. They have worked tirelessly for his release.
Today is day 27. Hirsch is still not home. Today is day 30. Today is day 58. Day 300.
Racheli Frankel, whose 16-year-old son Naftali was kidnapped and killed by Hamas, explains why she and others are marching.
To be together, to express the fact that we're never forgetting. We go to sleep with this at night, we wake up with this in the morning.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he is working to bring the hostages home, but hostage families, and more recently some in his military establishment, have accused him of acting slowly and adding new conditions for a deal with Hamas on a gradual ceasefire that would free the hostages.
Our long hand strikes in the Gaza Strip, in Yemen, in Beirut, and wherever necessary. This hand of ours reaches out when the time comes for peace to those who want to establish peace with us.
In Gaza, the death toll is rising, with the Hamas-run health ministry saying nearly 40,000 Palestinians have been killed in close to 10 months of fighting. Palestinian officials warn of a growing health crisis and are calling on the world to intervene.
This catastrophe is the result of the spread of urgent diseases, of infectious diseases, whether through water or breathing. There are more than 100,000 cases of hepatitis, noting that in the year preceding the aggression, there were only 85 cases across the Gaza Strip.
Palestinian officials say hospitals have stopped functioning and are in urgent need of equipment.
We need large quantities of beds, medicines, and medical supplies, as what has been sent is not enough to meet the hospital's needs.
More than 90% of Gaza's 2 million people have been displaced at least once and are spending the sweltering heat of the summer in tents with no air conditioning and few sanitation facilities. The fighting is showing no signs of letting up, and people on both sides see no hope for an end anytime soon. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
Still to come, Congo experiences an outbreak of Mpox. Stay with us.
On the next Straight Talk Africa,
Stop killing us! Stop killing us!
Generation Z protesters in Kenya take to the streets demanding change. They want good governance, accountability, and an end to corruption. They're not alone. They have inspired Nigerian youth protesting the high cost of living. Join me, Vincent Makori, for an in-depth discussion on a new generation of young people trying to make a difference.
In other news, the U.S. has completed its withdrawal of its military forces and assets from its last military base in Niger, according to the U.S. Department of Defense and the Defense Ministry of Niger. The completion marks the end of the U.S. counterterrorism mission in the West African country. Billboards and videos popping up in several African cities show 20th century independence leaders and anti-colonial quotes as part of a drive to promote the Kremlin-backed media outlet RT, formerly Russia Today. What they don't advertise is that the Russian outlet being promoted has been largely blocked in the West for being part of Putin's propaganda network and for pushing disinformation. And Kenya's Beatrice Chebet won the women's 5,000-meter race at the Paris Olympics on Monday, clocking 14 minutes and 28.5 seconds for her first major international title. Faith Kipyegon, also of Kenya, was awarded the silver after initially being disqualified for physical contact with Ethiopia's Gudaf Asegi. In parts of Africa, the malaria parasite is showing signs of resistance to artemisinin, the main drug used to fight the disease. A new report warns of potentially millions more deaths without immediate health policy changes. Henry Ridgwell reports from Bangkok.
It's estimated that over 1,000 children die every day from malaria in Africa, and there are fears that the death rate could rise. Artemisinin combination therapies, or ACTs, have been the cornerstone of malaria treatment for 20 years, but there are worrying signs that they are becoming less effective, says report co-author Lorenz von Seidlin of the Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Unit in Bangkok.
We have increasing reports from Eastern Africa saying that they have documented resistance against the first-line treatments against malaria.
Artemisinin-resistant mutations have been detected in more than 10% of malaria cases in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Rwanda, Uganda and Tanzania. Before artemisinin, chloroquine was the most widely used medicine to treat malaria. The report authors note that in the 1990s and early 2000s, signs that the malaria parasite was developing resistance to chloroquine were widely ignored.
When the chloroquine resistance slowly sneaked into Africa, there was a whole wave of childhood mortality followed by it. So really a large number of children, probably in the millions, died because chloroquine didn't work as well as it used to do. And now we see these first signs that something similar is happening with the ACTs. And that is, of course, very worrying.
The paper, published in the journal Science, urges policymakers and global funding bodies to act now to prevent artemisinin resistance taking hold. Their recommendations include combining artemisinin drugs with other medicines in so-called triple artemisinin combination therapies, the rollout of new, more effective insecticides and mosquito nets, better training of community health workers, the rapid deployment of new malaria vaccines and better monitoring. Von Seidlin says many of these methods have been used to halt the spread of artemisinin resistance in Southeast Asia over the past decade.
Ultimately, there was an understanding that this could be a major health emergency globally. And so there were a lot of investments from funders from high-income countries towards these countries in the Greater Mekong sub-region to stop the spread of artemisinin-resistant parasites.
Scientists say that sense of urgency must now be applied to tackling artemisinin resistance in Africa. Henry Ridgewell, VOA News, Bangkok.
It's time for a health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with an update on Mpox. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Esther. That's right. The Democratic Republic of Congo is experiencing the worst of an ongoing outbreak of Mpox, which is ongoing in parts of Africa. More than 12,000 people have been diagnosed with the disease, and at least 470 people have died, according to government data. The World Health Organization says a more virulent and deadlier form of the disease found in Congo, Clade 1b, is spreading beyond its borders. Over 4,200 cases have been recorded in 10 African nations, including Burundi, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, and South Africa. Mpox, formerly known as monkeypox, is a virus that causes fevers, headaches, and muscle aches, as well as painful boils on the skin. It spreads from person to person through close skin-to-skin contact. In rare cases, it can be deadly. The WHO is examining whether the latest outbreak should be declared a global public health emergency. Joining us from Lagos, Nigeria, for more insight is Dr. Sunday Aremu Omilabu, Professor of Medical Virology with the College of Medicine at the University of Lagos and Director of the Central Research Laboratory at Lagos University Teaching Hospital. Professor Omilabu, thanks for joining us. How concerning is the ongoing Mpox outbreak in Africa?
Thank you for having me. It's a serious situation because we know Mpox is contagious, and of course, and you know, the drivers has to do with unhygienic environment, and as we know, it's a zoonotic disease which originally transmits from animals to human, and to control it, so we have to maintain an hygienic environment. And then we have to imbibe cleanliness. Hand washing will prevent transmission. And then, of course, we know it causes eruption on the skin. And a few days after, you can see fluid coming out of the blisters that form. These fluids are highly infectious. And in the population in Africa, and of course, coupled with poverty and the overpopulation in some cases, so it's difficult to control transmission. So efforts must be put in place to stem it. We know the cause, it's the virus, the pox virus, which after containing smallpox, is the next pox virus that is actually disturbing human beings.
So, Professor, let me ask you this. Speaking of zoonotic diseases that you mentioned, a few years back, West Africa experienced an outbreak of Ebola. How much of that experience is guiding the strategy for this cross-border transmission with Mpox?
Thank you very much. With the incident of Ebola in the 2013, 2015, we've learned a lot of lessons, and which most countries put in place a lot of efforts, especially queuing behind the IHE, International Health Emergencies, which actually has been coordinating, making sure that countries prevent transmission. And a lot of activities are ongoing in most African countries, even though these activities are not enough, coupling with the fact that economic downturn is really affecting putting adequate measures to stem down outbreaks. The lesson learned from Ebola is actually enormous, and it's actually seeing the impact on the healthcare provision in the continent.
And briefly, there is no vaccine readily available. How can people protect themselves?
Exactly. There is no vaccine yet. And of course, and there's no drug either. All the drugs are being, they are just going through testing stage. So the only measure that can stem it is to actually maintain what we call barrier nursing while they are being attended to. And then, of course, while at home, we should make sure we don't have close contact with the confirmed cases.
Okay.
Because fluid coming from those rashes are highly
We have to leave it there, Professor. I apologize. Thank you so much, and we will continue the discussion during the radio show. That was Professor Omilabu joining us. I am Lenore Moudou. To find me on Twitter, actually, on X, at Lenore Moudou. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Lenore, and we'll have to say thank you very much. Join Lenore Moudou next Tuesday for another health report. And thank you for watching Africa 54. We'll see you back tomorrow.